Hey, so Trump says you can't just go all electric. Is he actually right? BYD is running into some issues over in Europe, little growing pains. Turns out that the 300-mile mark seems to be what's driving more Americans to EVs. There's a study that shows that EV owners save thousands on total cost of ownership. Of course they do. Gas prices starting to rise. And it looks like Tesla's actually started going after some people for trying to flip their Cybertrucks. Hey man, it's a wild Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. Let's get to it. Boom, happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm back. Took yesterday off because, well, I can. And as I always say, this is my second job that doesn't pay me anything. So sometimes you have to pay more attention to the job that actually does pay. So, but anyway, what's going on today? Well, yesterday, Trump did an interview with CNBC where he said, you can't just go all electric. Quote, I'm all for electric cars, but you have to have the alternatives also. First of all, they don't go far, they cost too much, and they're all going to be made in China. Now, or that's how he says, China. It's crazy, but I don't think he's 100% wrong here, because the reality is we're not ready to just go all electric now. There's no switch that we can flip and just be electric like today. The charging infrastructure is not even within a billion miles of where it needs to be in the U.S. We are so far behind. It's getting better, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. Tesla opening up their network over the last couple weeks to Fords was super exciting. You know, they'll be coming for Rivian and Polestar and Volvo coming up. And that's all awesome, especially for me as a Polestar driver. But it's still not enough, and it's not keeping pace with EV adoption. And, you know, at some point, EV adoption will get stunted by the fact that there's just not enough charging infrastructure. And so it's true that today and for the foreseeable future, the next, 5 to 6 or 7 years, we need all the alternatives. We need to have gas cars. I don't like them. I can't wait till the day when all cars are EVs. But the reality is people need to have options. And I think it should be market driven to a large extent. However, you do need government incentives. If we as a society want to, clean up the environment, get rid of pollution, and we'll never get rid of it. But, if that's the goal, then EVs are the way to go, and renewable energy, sustainable energy, that's the way to go. But we are not there yet. We're not even close. So he's not wrong about that. And so people need to have the option. And today, EVs aren't for everybody. If you live in an apartment building and there's no charging, an EV might not be the best option for you. Like where I live, in the part of Massachusetts where I live, is a charging desert when it comes to DC fast charging. There is, I think, maybe 7 DC fast charging stations, and I think 2 of them or 3 of them are Tesla stations that are not accessible for everybody as of right now today when I'm recording this. And, even some of the other ones, it's, a couple of car dealers that have 1 or 2 plugs. We have one Electrify America station within like 20 miles of where I live, and it's 4 stalls, and they're almost always either full or 1 or 2 of them are down. That's pathetic. And so, yeah, people need to have options. Like where I live right now, literally could not go all EV because the only way to be able to charge it is at home. And when he talks about they don't go far. We'll talk about that in a second about the 300-mile mark, but and they cost too much. That's changing. Costs are definitely coming down. Tesla started that, and the rest of them have followed. Ford dropped their prices in February and saw an 80% increase in EV sales. So when you get the price right, people will come. The problem is when the price is too high and it's too hard to charge, and and when he says they're all going to be made in China, that's the one that I think really should get people's attention, because I'm not bashing Chinese EV makers. I think they're great. The Chinese make fantastic EVs. I have one. My Polestar was made in China, and I love it. And there's the rub, though. That's the problem for the American car manufacturers. If they want to compete, they've got to do better. They've got to make better cars. We can't have situations like the Chevy EV or the Blazer EV, where they put it out and the software is just garbage, and they have to stop selling them. They just went back on the market, back on sale last week, I believe. But that can't happen. When that happens, it just ruins the rep, right? Ruins the reputation of American EVs. And right now, the Korean EV makers are killing it. The EV9, I mean, Kia dealers can't keep those things on the lot. EV6 is cool. The Ioniq 5, you're starting to see them all over the place. And it's a fantastic car. The Ioniq 5, I had one when I was in Tulsa as a rental car. It was awesome. It was a great car. And it wasn't even like the most powerful one. It was like the rear wheel drive, basically base model. But it was a great car. And, we've got to get there in America if we want to keep pace. Because if we don't, the fact of the matter is, when EVs do become the dominant, type of vehicle on the road, which, isn't going to be tomorrow, but it's probably 10, 15 years from now, we don't want the American car companies getting wiped out because the Chinese car companies come in here with just a far superior product. We need to be able to be better than them at making EVs, and I think we can be. But, I don't think Trump's wrong. So, crazy as that is, I mean, some people, even when they get most things wrong and they lie all the time, sometimes they do tell the truth and they do get something right. And I think this is one of those cases. So you can bash him all you want, but I think he's right about this. And I think if we're being realistic right now, if the election were held today, he'd get elected. And I'm not saying whether that's good or bad, or whether our current president is good or bad. I'm just saying, wherever you stand, if the election were held today, he'd probably get re-elected president. And, it's a good chance that that'll happen in November. So what will that do to the EV industry? I tend to think that it will not hurt. It actually might help. Believe it or not, as much as that sounds contrary to what might seem to be logic, it just seems that under Republican presidents, liberal agendas, considered liberal agendas, seem to rise, and under Democratic presidents, it seems like conservative agendas tend to rise. It's just a weird thing that kind of happens, So I'm not concerned about it at this point. I don't really care about politics that much anymore because, you consider the choices we have, none of them are good, and politicians are all full of shit. We all know that. So whatever. I like electric cars. I'm going to keep talking about electric cars, and they're going to keep gaining in popularity. And I don't think the political part of it really matters. So, but to that end, the 300-mile mark apparently is what is drawing more people to EVs. The Seattle Times article basically says, that's kind of sort of the magic number, it seems, that for people to really start to seriously consider EVs. Like, I think for most people, they feel like, if you have, let's say, for me, before I had an EV, I had a 2018 Nissan Maxima. That car, when I filled it up, was I believe it was like a 15-gallon tank, and its range was like 308 miles. And if I was just all highway driving, it was probably like 350, 360. So in a lot of gas vehicles, 300 miles is about the range, right? Depending on the size of tank and what you're driving. And just like electric cars, they're not all the same. But I think that's where people feel the most comfortable. Like, if they can drive 300 miles, they feel comfortable, even if they're never going to do it. Even if, their commute to work every day is 10 miles, or they work at home and they don't have to drive that much. It's still that mental barrier is 300 miles, right? So as more and more EVs are hitting that 300 mile plus bench and the prices are coming down, people are more comfortable, right? It just makes sense. However, I'll say it again, the charging infrastructure has to keep up, because you might be able to go 300 miles, but if you go 300 miles and there's nowhere to charge, you're not going to go any farther than 300 miles, right? So we need to make sure that the charging infrastructure keeps up. But it seems like another key to EV adoption in the U.S. is that 300-mile mark, and more EVs coming out today are 300 plus, and that's all a good thing. And I think that's only going to increase over time as battery technology gets better and better and better. I would imagine that by the end of this decade, 500-mile range will be common. And I think at that point, it's, again, like, all the stuff that's coming, it's it gets harder and harder and harder to argue that ICE is better. If we have better charging, longer range, EVs just make more sense. And that shows, there's another study out that shows that EV owners save thousands on total cost of ownership. Now, obviously, I agree with that. I think it definitely is true. I mean, especially if you consider the fact that there's almost no maintenance. And as a matter of fact, with my Polestar, the day that I picked it up, you know, the guy at Polestar, at the space, not the dealer, the space, Polestar space. You know, we were going through the car. He was showing me all the different screens, you know, on the infotainment and all the different settings and all that kind of stuff. And there was one for service. And the day I picked it up, it said next scheduled service, 20,000 miles or 720 days. Because there's no oil to change. There's no belts. There's no fluids, you know, other than windshield washer fluid, right? It was going to be like 20,000 miles or 2 years before you need to do anything. Well, I picked that car up on April 2nd, 2022. So guess what? We're almost 2 years in. And I got a message on my car the other day that said, book service appointment. It's your 2-year service appointment or 20,000 miles. I haven't even hit 20,000 miles yet. So it's because it's 2 years. And it's going to be going in for service in a couple weeks. Of course, I will record all of that. But that kind of speaks to it, right? Like, I haven't had to do any service to this car since I got it. None. Now, if I had still had my ICE car, I would have been taken in for oil changes every 5,000 miles. And, of course, then they changed all the fluids. You check the belts, check the brakes, all that stuff. When I used to do that, like, every time, it was like anywhere from $100 to $500, depending on what they had to do. You know, it was just the oil change and some fluids. It was not a big deal. But sometimes they'd be like, oh, well, there's a cracked belt, or, you know, your brake pads need to get replaced, or whatever it is. So the cost would just add up. So from that perspective, I can say that as far as service, my EV has been fantastic. Now, cost of ownership, I mean, obviously it costs less to fuel it. Electricity still costs less than gas. It was kind of almost getting close with, you know, between DC fast charging, depending on where you did it, and gas prices. But gas prices have been starting to inch up again. They're still a little bit lower than they were a year ago, but compared to a month ago, they've gone up quite a bit. And it seems like oil prices are starting to rise, so gas prices, especially going into the warmer months, the summer months, gas prices tend to rise. So it certainly costs less in the summertime to own an EV than it does an ICE car, as far as just fueling it up and that kind of thing. But some of these numbers I'm not so sure about, because this study was done by Atlas Public Policy, and they're basically comparing like a 7-year total cost of ownership. And I know that I believe the average length of ownership for a vehicle in the U.S. is 12 years, which I think is crazy. How many people keep a car for 12 years anymore? I mean, I know some people probably do. I know just my own parents, they have a 2009 and it still runs. So certain people just will drive a car until it literally dies. So I'm still not sold on this like 7-year number. And, you know, they compare like a Toyota Corolla versus a Chevy Bolt. Over 7 years, the Corolla will cost you totally 7-year total cost of ownership is $42,348. The total 7-year or total cost of ownership for 7 years for the Bolt is $31,768, and that's including buying the car, right? So it's like a $10,000 difference. Okay, that might be true. But who's keeping a Corolla or a Bolt for 7 years? Maybe there are some people, right? But then you get to like a Camry Camry SE Nightshade, which costs $28,960, and a Tesla Model 3, which is $38,990. So they must be comparing the base model. And the total cost of ownership over 7 years for the Camry is $44,307. It's $44,108 for the Tesla. So it's a difference of $127. So at least they're honest there. But then they have like a Nissan Rogue versus an ID4. It's a $7,000 difference. A Highlander versus a Model Y. I guess that's an apt comparison. It's $4,300. Then they have like an F-150 XL Super Crew versus an F-150 Lightning. and it's like $2,800 difference in total cost of ownership. So unless you're on the lower end, I guess it's not that much of a difference. So while it's true, I think you do save a lot of money overall. Is it enough to convince someone to go from ICE to EV today? Probably not. But it is something to consider. I mean, and I think, a lot of it depends on how much you drive, because if you drive a ton, whether it's an ICE car or an EV, you're putting more wear and tear on the car, on the tires, on the wheels, on the brakes. Less with the brakes when you have an electric car with regenerative braking, but still, it's just like anything else. The more you use it, the more wear and tear you put on it, right? Makes sense. So I still think EVs are the way to go. Even when the difference is only $127, I'd rather drive a Tesla Model 3 base model than a Toyota Camry of any kind, anytime, any day of the week, any year. The Tesla's just better. So it was an interesting study, but I think the jury's still somewhat out, like super long term. But you can't argue with the fact that you have to do almost no service to an electric vehicle. Like, you rotate the tires. That's like it. And so I'll document my whole Polestar service experience, how that goes, what the cost is, all that kind of stuff. And, we'll see. And the last thing, second to last thing, BYD apparently is running into some problems over in Europe. Some little growing pains, just some issues with shipping vehicles from China to Europe, because they're finding some mold in some of the cars. There's a little bit of a pile up. They call it because of weak demand. Now, BYD says demand isn't weak, that they're just shipping a ton of cars over to Europe. And I know that BYD's cars are actually really good. They're not, this is not a dig on them in any way at all, because I think they're just, they sell a ton of cars in China. That's where they're based, obviously. And shipping in country is easier than when you have to put a bunch of cars on a giant ship and send them off to a different continent. Things happen along the way. They're on that ship for a long time. That's where some of these mold issues come from. Apparently they weren't ionizing the cars properly before shipping them. There's been some dings and scratches on some vehicles when they arrive, and they have to do a little bit more extra work to get the cars ready for the markets that they're going into. But I think those are all things that they'll get better at as they mature as a company, just like Tesla did, right? And BYD also is looking at building plants all over the world. So, I think they realize it long term, it makes more sense to build the cars on the continent than to have to ship them from one to another. So just like Tesla, they have, the Fremont factory, of course, but Giga Texas, they put Giga Berlin, which got shut down last week by some eco-terrorists, but it's going to be back up this week. They have Giga Shanghai. They understand it's a lot easier to ship cars on the continent than to ship them to another continent, right? So I think BYD will be just fine. And again, I know people fear the Chinese automakers coming to the U.S. I don't fear it. I just know the American car companies will have to get better. But if BYDs make it to the U.S., I think it'll be great for the market, because they make pretty good cars, and they make them at a reasonable price. So I'm not afraid of them coming here. I think it would be good, but it might still be a while before they crack through. And then the last thing, of course, is it appears that everyone knows that Tesla told anyone that took delivery of a Cybertruck that they would get sued if they tried to flip it. And apparently they are going after people, not necessarily suing them, but basically canceling any orders that they might have pending. So they've caught some people that have listed their Cybertrucks or have flipped their Cybertrucks, and they have more on order. They're basically saying, nope, you can't buy Teslas anymore. And I know I saw Doug DeMuro talking about why hasn't he reviewed a Cybertruck. He made a whole video about it, and it was basically just that reason. Like, he likes to, because he has Cars and Bids, he likes to review cars that go on Cars and Bids, right? And apparently he's had a few people that have talked about maybe trying to list their Cybertruck on Cars and Bids, but they were afraid to do it because of what would happen. Would they get sued? Would Tesla ban them? That kind of thing. And I think Don't know if he has anybody yet, but I think in that video he had somebody that maybe was willing to finally actually list a car on Cars and Bids. And I think Doug's point was right, and the point of the Electrek article is also correct, that, you know, basically, I mean, Tesla can say that you can sign whatever saying that you agree, but if you buy something, especially if you pay cash for it, you're not financing it with that company. It's not financed through Tesla. If you hand over that $120,000 for that Foundation Series Cybertruck, you pay him the $120,000 in cash. I mean, this is a free country. You should be able to do whatever you want with it. If you want to sell it for $300,000 and someone is crazy enough to pay that, you should be able to sell it to them for that and not face any kind of repercussions for it. But I imagine that it would be really hard for Tesla to actually sue somebody and win. But I think, as Doug pointed out, it's not about whether or not they win. It's about them suing you or coming after you. Like, can you afford to take on Tesla? Because even if Tesla doesn't win, they can push it, and they've got all the money in the world for lawyers and fees and all that. And even if you are somebody that can afford a $100,000 Cybertruck, that doesn't mean that you can afford, you know, $1,000 an hour attorneys to go through an entire lawsuit process. So, you know, just that hanging over your head might be enough to convince people that maybe I won't sell my Cybertruck. But I just think it's interesting to see that they're actually, you know, trying to go after people. We'll see how successful that is. But again, I mean, if you bought a Cybertruck, wouldn't you want to keep it? I mean, I guess there are some people out there that their whole point of buying it is to flip it, but that wouldn't be what I would do. But anyway, that's what's going on today. I hope you guys had a great Tuesday. The weather is getting nicer. Spring is starting to spring here in the Northeast. It's getting nice. Today was a beautiful day. I hope it was where you are. Hope you had a great day. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And I will see you guys next time.